When I first came in, I thought the league was doomed because Jordan had went to play baseball that first year. My mouth was just as bad then as it is now. And Jordan asked Javi, he said, "Who's the rookie?" And Javi said, "Oh, that's Tony Brothers or what?" I said, "Rookie?" I said, "I was here last year when you were trying to play baseball." So the league may have changed since then, but I have not.
I would say the league was, in my mind, was bigger than life. I was sitting there thinking about the great rivalries we had when we first came in, right? So it was Knicks, Bulls, and Lakers, Celtics, and Jazz, Sonics back then, and Rockets were the champions the year I came in, I believe. Yes, they were. And I just remember the rivalries, and we didn't have but maybe 2 players that came out of high school. So the guys just seemed old to me. The players seemed old to me. I mean, I was 27 when I got hired, so they just seemed old. And now I look at the league and I just see kids that are playing that are younger than all my kids. And I don't mean to say they're my kids, but it's just a different look to me now, 30 years later.
And you refereed their fathers.
And I did referee their fathers. So I made a list of the number of fathers and sons I refereed. I tried to do it one thing. I think I have 20 sets of father sons. I'm waiting for the grandson to come, and I think maybe.
Good luck with that.
He'll be here.
He'll be here by himself.
Yeah. He'll be here.
Possibly.
To me, the league was all survival because they didn't know who I was or any of us were, and we had a very veteran staff back then. And my whole thing was, how do I get respect from the players and coaches when we get out there? I remember my first game, because I got hired the year of the lockout, so we didn't even start working until January. So they were going at full speed. I was like a deer in headlights, and I remember saying to myself, when I make a call, the person comes at me, I'm calling a tech, I'm gonna make them respect me on the floor. And about 5 minutes into the game, I had my first whistle, and I called the foul, and everybody just walked to the lane and took their spots. I said, "Oh, I could do this. I've been here a long time." But back then, it was just that the strength of the game, the power of the game, the physicality of the game was something we did all on judgment. And not having that experience ahead of time, that was the whole thing for, I think, all of us, was just trying to figure out how do we manage a game with that kind of, with those kind of players in the game.
Yeah, I think the physicality was, and we had so many centers in my rookie year. We had, Ewing, we had Shaquille, we had every team had a great center, it seemed like,
Yeah.
and you had all this physicality in the post. And when you didn't have a great center, you still had guys like Charles Barkley backing everybody down in the post, and just everything was bang, bang, bang down low. And my rookie year, I looked it up today. We had 9,400 3-pointers taken. That's a fraction of them.
Yeah.
Last year, we had 95,000 3-pointers taken. So the spacing is whatever. And now we have great centers in our league, but they don't do the same things those centers did. So being down in the lead position when I'm my rookie year and watching Shaquille bang against Elijah Wan or something like that was like, you just don't see that now.
Right.
You'd never see that now.
I think, no disrespect to the training now and how guys are learning, because education is an evolutionary process. I think because we cut our teeth on the physicality, we cut our teeth on post play all the time. The physicality, I mean, think about not only in the post, but guard play was extremely handsy at the time.
Oh, Gary Payton and John Stockton.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
The
All of
speed
it was
the captain speed
it was a combat all the time, and so you had to learn discernment of plays along the way to be successful. The point is, how can you learn how to call plays, what fits, what doesn't fit, what do we need to do, those type of things, and I think it just prepared you better. And the one place that really prepared you that I know is totally different than it was then is the CBA compared to the G League now. So if it was a war when we got to the league, it was, I don't know what you want to call it in the CBA, because that was every play, every minute, all the time. And
with just 2 guys.
With just 2 guys, yeah, exactly, all the time, yeah.
Yeah.
I can tell you the room has definitely gotten changed from year to year, because when I got hired, I think it was only 48. Now we have a staff of 75 or more, so the room itself is different. But I go back, to me, it was an honor and privilege to be able to walk through that door.
Well, one thing, it's interesting what you said about the numbers. When I went to camp as an instructor last year for the first time in a while, and I walked into a room with 70 referees being trained in one room. You and I, all 5 of us were trained together under Daryl Garrettson when we were coming up, and the 4 of us especially. And I remember there was 11 of us in the room. There were 16 of us in the room. I remember sitting in the room, I was I was still at the University of Maryland and taking classes, and he looked in the room and he looked around and he said, 11 of the 16 of you are going to get hired in the next 3 years. And I thought, my boy, I better get out of college.
And he'd sit there, Darryl would sit there with his glasses, and he said, gentlemen, pull out the manual, open up to page 16.
16. That's the page.
When the ball is in the middle of the floor, the lead will position himself at the 3-foot posted-up mark, accepting the ball until it comes in the front court, and he would go on and
That's exactly what he said.
Exactly.
That's 31 years. That's 35 years ago. He
read
just
that
said exactly
manual
what
to us word for word, and then we'd have 100 question tests that he would send 2 weeks before camp, and you'd go through the test and you'd write it and you'd fill out the answers, but you'd also cite the citation of the rule so that you clearly understood exactly what was expected when this particular play come up. And it would just, for whatever reason, it'd speed up your recall. Today, pull out your iPad, change the font so you can read it. Make sure you hit the dot that says true, false, or multiple choice questions. You gotta read them and make sure all of the above is there. I mean, it's just
It's a lot different.
totally different.
You know, interesting point you just made about walking through that door. Like, for me, the big part walking through that door was those guys that sat in the back of the room. Because all the vets sat
In the back
of the room.
Yeah, they all sat in the
and you're
back,
like,
yeah.
wow, there's Hugh Evans.
Yeah.
There's Hugh Holland. There's Jake O'Donnell. There's Joey Crawford, Danny
It
Crawford.
was all the bad kids in the back of the classroom. We were all in the front row like,
But we walked in, and I think there was.
We had assigned seats.
Yeah, that was later
We
on.
were.
That
Oh,
was,
yeah,
that was,
no,
that
yeah.
was
That was
later.
later on.
That was later. But we walked in and it was like this aura in the room.
Yes.
And to your point about people that walk in the room now, I wonder, do they look at the veterans on staff the same way as we did?
I would never question Hugh Evans, and you didn't always know. But if he said it, that's what we were doing, and we would go with it.
When you talk about mentors, those guys didn't say a whole lot, but they were incredible mentors.
they really were.
Yeah.
And they would sit down with you after the game at the bar, because we didn't have the tape and everything we have now. But they would just talk about the game, and they would talk about how to manage and handle one coach versus another coach. When the game got escalated, how you had to recognize it within a possession or two before the game got out of hand. And they just were such great teachers without having half the stuff that we have now.
But here's an interesting stat. More referees have worked the NBA Finals than we have referees that have 30-year careers.
More referees have worked the NBA Finals than we have that have worked 30 or more years.
That is correct.
That's it. I would have never thought that, but that makes sense. Because I actually asked ChatGPT the other day, list the referees that have worked 30 years or more in the NBA. And when I got the list, I went, oh, this must be an incomplete list. But then I started, well, no, that guy was 28, that guy was 27. Even like Steve Jabby, one of the greatest referees of all time, just 25, right?
25,
So,
yeah.
So
Yeah, good.
I'm honored and privileged to be in this room
Yeah.
with an elite group of people, because it's only 5 of us sitting at this table.
We're old people.
there should be,
But I know one thing, at Summer League this summer, man, you know, when you don't see a lot of players that you normally see, or guys that are starting to get into coaching, if one more cat said, hey, OG, I was like, yo, when you were playing, I was James, now I'm OG. And from an officiating perspective, I think the biggest change is we used to master the paint. We wanted to be good in the paint. We didn't want to have any errors in the paint. We didn't want the physicality raised to a level to where it potentially could lead to a fight. But now, today's game, the physicality is all on the perimeter. And
Closeouts,
the closeouts, the screens,
High fives,
all of that. And I think that that's the biggest thing. I think officiating on the perimeter is easier than refereeing in the paint, because we had war in the paint. And even though we have physicality above free throw line extended now, it's not as physical as it once was on drives to the baskets, post-ups, cutters through the lane. So on that note, I think the game is easier to officiate now than it was when we first got in the league.
100%. I think when we first got in the league, there weren't guidelines in the post like we have now. Like it was like, you know, if the guy needs to get in the weight room, you know, I'm not calling that. It's like, that's a rule, you know. So we didn't have the guidelines we have now. The players, they didn't know what they could and couldn't do. It was basically whatever crew let them do that night. So now our guidelines are, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, and everybody tries to get on the same page and call it. But I mean, it goes back to the 95,000 three-pointers we took in the NBA last year versus 9,400 in 1994, my rookie year. That's the biggest thing. Space is easier to referee. Back in the day, we had 8 guys in the paint, and that was tough. Especially, you know, we put the restricted area in because we were having Charles Oakley try and take block charges from rotating weak to strong instead of jumping up and blocking shots. So the NBA changed that. But I think the biggest thing is people think like. And I think that the golden era of the NBA is in the 90s. I mean, I really do enjoy watching those on classic sports. And but it troubles me when players from those old generations say Michael would average 80 in this league. There's not enough possessions for anybody to average 80 in this league, so let's get over that. And the number of fouls, and then they talk about the fouls. Well, we called 48 fouls my rookie year per game. And last year, I think we called 40 fouls per game. So fouls are down 20%. You know, so a lot of different things are contributing to the beauty of the game. I looked at some scores. Your first game was Bulls Knicks, and I was jealous because I think it was on NBC or something. You got a game that I should have had.
I had my first national televised game before you did. So that's in the record.
Put that feather in your cap.
Yeah.
But I worked the Bulls Knicks in March when it was a little more important. Man, this has been going on for 35 years. Anyway, so but I looked at the score of that game, and like your game was 73 to like 59 or 73-69. It was like a weird score. My score was like 101 to 99, but I think
poor officiating.
Yeah, it was poor officiating. I think the game went to double overtime to get to those numbers, right? We get that in the third quarter now.
Yeah.
So it's a different game now. But to your point, I think it's easier to referee with all the space that's created by these offenses. The coaching in the NBA, and not again, I don't want to knock the coaches of the 90s. That's how we played in the 90s. The way they've studied the game, the way they've integrated, put all this offensive defense in, has made the game just better to look at. I worked a game in Detroit, and I believe it was Philly. The final score was 67-66. It was a playoff game. Wow. The next night I went and did Sacramento Dallas. The halftime score was 66-67. We rarely see that ever in the NBA now. And I think that it's good for our game.
It's balanced. You went from an Eastern Conference to a Western Conference. I think back then they played more up-tempo in the Western Conference versus the East was more half-court, possession. Where in the Western Conference, they would just let it go.
Yeah, but even now, well, back then, we had, each team had 5 players the size of Embiid. And now you find one of those guys, every 5 teams. It's just, to me, we just don't have the big players that we used to have, especially in the post. And I think that's why you had to be really good in the post, because that's where you would get hurt.
Right. Yeah. Well, I remember you talk about the post. One of the lessons I learned from Joey Crawford was he used to always talk about each team had 2 centers, and their job was to protect the rim, and how valuable their fouls were, and how you had to learn to referee the defender, especially the centers, because if you got them in foul trouble, how it changed the whole focus of the game. Well, now with positionless basketball, they just throw the next guy in. Mm-hmm. But that was one of the things that drove me to try and be perfect on those drives to the basket because of how valuable, not that one player's fouls are more valuable than the other, but at that time, they needed the center in the game. And that was a valuable piece to the puzzle.
So you couldn't mess up plays.
Right,
You had to be good with those plays.
Right.
It wasn't a matter of, I think I'll call that and I won't call that. It was more of like, if you put it, if you put a second foul on someone and put them on the bench and it was not a good call, that was changing the game, and that happened more so back then because of the big time
Absolutely.
centers we had in the league back then.
But that was not only your centers and your rebounders. It was
Yeah.
2 sets of rebounds in every game, right? So the same thing is the challenge was to be consistent on both ends so that if I put the second foul on this guy in the first quarter, I'm comfortable with his second foul. It wasn't guesswork, right? So that was important. But to go back to some of the biggest changes, right? So we came in when it was basically a half-court game. Sometimes they ran.
One side, half
Yeah.
court and on one side.
And on one side, right? To now, it is a fluid running game. This to me is the biggest difference. The skill sets of the players are different, right? So now the skill sets fit what they do now, which is everybody has to run and everybody needs to be able to shoot a three. Everybody's not going to shoot them like Steph, but everybody needs to be able to shoot a three. So it's different. So we don't have the same type of physicality in the post because what they did was they dominated on the inside and then went outside. That was the basic way to win every NBA game, and especially to win a championship. You go back to watch the games, and I know you know this, the teams that won the championship dominated on the inside and filled it in with outside shooting. That's how they won it. Analytics has changed it and said, hey, if you shoot volume threes, you're going to score more and you have a better chance of winning. And so now the spacing changed and it opened up the floor. To me, it's interesting because I remember there was only one or two teams, like Phoenix was one, that would have more spacing. And every time I had them, I said, wow, this is so easy. It's like,
And that was even before D'Antoni. I mean,
that was before D'Antoni.
Nash. Was
Yeah,
before,
yeah.
That's
That's Simmons and
Marley
all
and
them. It's
like-
Barkley
Man,
yeah.
all
It
those
was
guys.
like, hey man, I can see all 10 people all the time. I was like, this is easy. So the spacing, they opened up the floor so much that you could see everything. To me, the challenge now with all the spacing, and you were talking about the physicality is on the perimeter, is it's not so much that it's physicality on the perimeter, but you got to know when to and when not to, right? So the discernment on when defenders are starting to attack people on the perimeter is different, right? It's almost in the same vein of how we learn how to referee in the post. You got to learn how to referee on the perimeter, and right? And I think eventually that is going to be at some point in time. You may still be here. I won't. That there's going to be a great mix of that inside-outside game that we haven't seen yet, right? Because you're starting to get guys like Embiid who can do both, right? He can do both, right? You get Jokic, who not as much as Embiid inside, but he's got the size to be inside if he needs to be, right? But he can take you outside. And said, there's going to be a team that's going to put something together that you're not going to be able to handle them because they're going to be able to be good at doing both. And they're going to run, right? We run so much now compared to the half-court games that we had in the 90s, which was a war on one end, come down, a war on the other.
Like, what's the difference between how you prepare now as compared to 30 years ago?
Well, one thing, you gotta be in better shape now.
And we got to train them.
Yeah.
You have to be in much better shape now to keep up with the pace of the game than when we first came in.
It was easier then.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
like-
It wasn't. It wasn't even, you never got physically tired out there. Because we all know that once you get physically tired, then you get mentally tired. You have to really be conscious of where you're at and what's going on in that game. But now, you have to go into that game ready. The other thing now, obviously, I think it probably happens for all of us because of our position on the crew is, when I first got in the league, I was with Hugh Evans, Bernie Fryer, and those guys. I was along for the ride.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just had to get my area, keep my area clean,
You know the rules.
and help them. And you had to know the rules.
Yeah.
Making sure that me being a student of the game, where I talk about coach's philosophy, player philosophy, team philosophy, certain moves they have. I take on an added responsibility to have my crew prepared for that, and that wasn't done when we first came.
When we first came in, first of all, we didn't have pregame meetings. we had lunch and we talked a little bit about the game then. But I remember when I first came to the league, we prepared for chaos. So we prepared for, okay, if a fighting foul happens and if they throw this guy out and there's opposing coach bench, and we had all these rules for preparing subs and that sort of thing from chaos, meaning fights and altercations and trash talking and how to handle that. That's how we used to prepare for games. And now we prepare for play situations. Block charge will be taken by the lead, blah, blah, blah. And we go through all these different play situations. But yeah, like you say, as a crew chief, it's now more about preparing the crew to work as a crew. Whereas it used to be, for back in the day, it was more about how are we going to handle this monster of a game. And now we're more about how are we going to handle the mechanics of what we do.
But we didn't have guidelines back then.
No.
So now, trying to get everybody on the same page is different, because our philosophy back then was advantage, disadvantage.
Right.
You did the contact, put the player at advantage or disadvantage. You put it at a disadvantage, that normally was a foul. If it wasn't, then we played through it. Where now, the set of guidelines we have, and with the rhythm, speed, balance, and quickness, and all those other guidelines of incidental versus legal contact in place that we talk about, and plus the fact, like we're here at training camp, probably gonna look at 1,500 plays. I think that we're able to get on the same page a little sooner
But they had
than we
to,
did back then.
well, they had to do that because to go from 48 to 75, like you know, we stayed in the program so long that when we came in, I think we were ready to kind of hit the ground running. There wasn't a long learning curve.
Right.
And when the summer came, you know, it was only a few people going to camp, so you were working more games.
But that might be why we're here. You think about the reps we had working two-man mechanics and the CBA.
That's what I mean.
And then in the summer,
Yes.
you would go to camp for 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Yes.
I mean, we had thousands of reps. If you
Yes.
go with that 10,000 hour philosophy, we got that.
Oh, yeah.
What's something you do? You did your first game that you continue to do like every game for 30 years.
For discipline, I make sure I read a rule at least every game day, not every other day, just to keep my mind sharp. But I make sure going forward now is imperative that you stay to your routine and discipline so that comfort zone that you have stays intact.
Well, but what you said for me for 30 years is what I think why all of us are here, and that is we've done the same thing every day for every game, whether it's October 3rd or June 3rd, and it really helps you so that the moment the ball goes up at 7:05 in LA or 7:05 in New York, your mind, your body, you're ready to roll.
But you know, I think the really fascinating part that really drives me for the profession is that we've all experienced success, but there's nothing more humbling of continuing to work hard because we're all a whistle away from disaster, but the profession gives you this quest to continue to be well and not take your successes for granted because you were good last year. Every time you walk out on that floor, there's always something to prove to yourself, the people that trust you, that gave you the assignment, the fans, the people that participate. And I think that's one of the things that I'm most proud of, is that some nights were better than others, but it wasn't like I just showed up and I just walked out on the floor. There was preparation. There was a thought behind what I did. My routine was consistent. The preparation was there at 150%. And when we go out on the floor, although we're not going to be perfect, the strive for perfection and excellence was demonstrated on a nightly basis. And that's the thing that still gets me excited about coming back every year.